Okay, welcome back to the deep dive.
Good to be here.
So today we're tackling something that feels pretty significant. It's about communication, really.
Yeah, it definitely is. We're diving into what our sources are framing as a crisis in American literacy.
Right, and not just literacy in the basic sense, but the whole ability to write well, to think clearly, to use language with precision and maybe even a bit of beauty.
Exactly. The mission today is to try and figure out why. Why does it feel like mastering language, really articulating your thoughts clearly, has become, the sources call it a dying art?
And this isn't just a feeling, right? The research suggests it's measurable.
Oh, yeah. It seems rooted in decades of educational changes and policies. We need to unpack that.
Okay, so let's start with the state of modern writing itself. If you read, say, a lot of contemporary literary, do you ever get that?
It all kind of sounds the same.
Yeah. Exactly. The sources we looked at observe this homogeneity. It often lacks that distinct voice, that clarity or imagery, the kind of flow that it just feels flatter.
And you see the fallout from this lack of confidence in language everywhere, especially online, right?
Yeah. Like what?
Well, the sources point to things like, emojis in professional emails.
Oh, right. Like, how many smiley faces are too many?
Exactly. There are actual articles about that. It's like, we've forgotten words can do the job on their own. It's weird.
But I think the biggest, maybe the most alarming piece of evidence the research highlights is our reliance on machines to write for us.
You mean like Grammarly and spell check?
Yeah, and going way beyond that, people using things like ChatGPT to write whole emails or poems or novels, even just like a difficult text message.
Right, and this is critical. The sources really emphasize this. The reason these AI tools got adopted so fast, so widely,
isn't because AI caused the problem.
No, it's proof the problem was already huge. People grabbed onto AI because they genuinely felt they couldn't write effectively without it. The deficit was already there.
That makes sense. It's a crutch for a pre-existing weakness.
A crutch that, according to the research, is actually making things worse for aspiring writers. It actively kills their ability to develop their own style, their own voice.
Because you're outsourcing the hard part, the thinking, the structuring, the word choice.
Precisely. You're not building that mental muscle. So, okay, if the problem isn't just AI, if AI is just a symptom, where does the actual problem start?
We have to go back, right?
All the way back, the sources suggest, to elementary school. But even before that, we need to agree on what we're talking about. What does actual literacy even mean?
Right. Before we can talk about why writing is suffering, we need that benchmark. What is actual literacy? Because like you said, that term itself seems up for debate.
It really is. So to get a more objective baseline, the research points to this international standard, PIAAC. That's the Program for the International Assessment of Adult Competence.
Okay, PIAAC, international standard. What's their definition?
It's quite layered, which is important. They define literacy as accessing, understanding, evaluating, and reflecting on written texts.
Okay.
In order to achieve one's goals, to develop one's knowledge and potential, and to participate in society. So it's very functional.
Let's pause on that first. Accessing. That sounds like more than just, opening a file.
Oh, definitely. And the PIAAC sense, accessing means knowing where to find relevant information, how to navigate texts effectively, how to filter out all the noise and distractions.
Especially online.
Exactly. So it links literacy directly to what the sources call actual, authentic, critical thinking.
Yeah.
Finding, vetting, using information yourself.
Okay, so that's the standard. Active, critical engagement with text to achieve goals. How do American adults measure up against that standard, according to PIAAC?
Well, this is where it gets pretty sobering. The data is shocking, honestly. We're talking basic reading competence here, not like literary theory.
Let's hear it.
Okay, so PIAAC uses levels. Level 1 is the absolute bottom. The sources call it kindergarten literacy.
Kindergarten for adults.
We're talking struggling with anything much harder than, say, super simple instructions with text, like the back of a mac and cheese box. Can't handle distractions, only short, simple text.
And how many American adults are at that level? Level 1 or below?
Get ready for this. Over 25.
Wow. 1 in 4 adults.
1 in 4. Functionally unable to reliably handle things like standard medical forms, voting instructions, bank statements, things you need to navigate society. They're incredibly vulnerable.
Okay, that's already staggering. What about level 2?
Level 2 is described as maybe 3rd or 4th grade literacy.
Still pretty basic.
Very basic. They can handle slightly longer, simple text, maybe multi-page, put together limited interpretations, manage minor distractions, but still very limited analysis.
And the percentage for level 2?
That accounts for about another 29% of the population.
Okay, so if you add Level 1 and level 2, 25 plus 29.
You're looking at almost 60, okay, 54% to be precise, but yeah, nearly 60%.
60% of American adults can't reliably read above a basic third or fourth grade level.
According to the PIAAC data, yes, they can't really analyze complex information. They can't evaluate sources critically.
So this is the foundation we're dealing with, this decay in actual real literacy.
It has to be a massive factor in why writing quality might be declining, right? If your audience fundamentally struggles to understand anything complex or nuanced.
Why would writers bother creating it? The incentive structure just collapsed right to the level people can...
Exactly. It creates a downward pressure on the whole system. ###3. The crisis in higher education and reading comprehension.
Okay, so if 60% of the general pop struggling at that level, what about the people who are supposed to be the expert? You know, the ones going into teaching or journalism or becoming authors themselves, English majors, for instance.
That's the next logical question. And there's actually a recent study from 2024 that looked at exactly that. English literature majors at 2 Midwestern universities. Pretty standard, respected places.
What did the study involve?
It was clever. They took these English majors, people specializing in literature, mind you, and gave them the first 7 paragraphs of Dickens' Bleak House.
Okay, class-dense stuff, descriptive 19th century prose, challenging.
Definitely challenging. And the task was simple. Read it and then translate it into modern English to show you understood what was going on.
Seems fair for an English major. So how did they do?
The results were, well, alarming doesn't quite cover it. 58%. 58% of these English majors tested at level 1 literacy or just slightly above.
At the level 1, the kindergarten level?
Or barely above. They were categorized as problematic readers. More than half of the literature students couldn't functionally comprehend moderately difficult classic prose.
What did problematic mean in this context? What were they doing wrong?
It wasn't just missing a few old words. The sources say they understood so little they couldn't possibly have read the whole novel on their own.
But did they realize they didn't understand it?
That's the disturbing part. Many apparently believed they would have no problem reading the rest of the 900-page novel just from skimming those first few paragraphs.
Because they skimmed.
They admitted it. Their process was described as immediate skimming, maybe glancing at SparkNotes later. And worse, this self-assessment issue.
Yeah.
Many either didn't even realize that they don't understand it, or, and this is kind of mind-blowing, they felt their lack of deep understanding didn't really seem to matter.
Didn't matter. For an English major reading Dickens.
Apparently not. Getting through it, ticking the box, seemed more important than actually, getting it.
This sounds like it goes beyond individual. It sounds like a system problem.
Absolutely. And we see that echoed elsewhere. The sources mentioned a piece in The Atlantic where university professors were saying they've had to drastically lower expectations.
Lower them how?
English professors can't assume their majors will read whole assigned books anymore.
Seriously, for an English degree.
Seriously. The expectation is often just assigned passages now, with the professor basically filling in the rest during lectures.
Wow. But the anecdote that really floored me from the source material.
The students showing up to college not knowing they'd have to read whole books.
Yes. Some students arrived on campus, enrolled as English majors, and were apparently shocked that reading entire novels was part of...
And some even said, explicitly, they didn't know how to read a whole book.
As if it's some special technique.
Exactly. They saw it as some special knowledge that they never received, a specific procedure they hadn't been taught, rather than just, reading continuous.
Let that sink in for a moment. English majors viewing reading a book as an untaught procedure.
It points directly back to how they were first taught to read, doesn't it?
It has to. Which brings us to the reading wars.
Exactly. If you have literature students who literally don't know how to approach reading a whole book, something went fundamentally wrong much earlier. And the sources argue it stems from this decades-long, often very heated debate between two main ways of teaching reading, phonics versus whole language.
Okay, let's break those down. Phonics first. That's the one most people probably.
Phonics is all about decoding. You learn the sounds the letters make, the phonemes, and you sound out the word buata, bat.
Right. Building the word from its sound.
Yes. And the evidence strongly suggests this method leads to better reading comprehension overall. And crucially, it gives you the tools to figure out new words you've never seen before. You can decode.
Okay, so that's phonics. What's the alternative? Whole language, or sometimes called look-sick.
Right. Whole language works very differently. It's more about word recognition, treating words almost like symbols or picture. You memorize the whole shape of the word, often using context clues or pictures in the book to guess.
So less about sounding it out, more about associating the shape with the meaning.
Pretty much. The sources note it's almost like trying to teach English as if it were a character-based language, like Chinese, instead of the phonetic alphabetic language it actually is.
Does it work as well?
Well, the neurological evidence suggests there's a major difference in how the brain processes language depending on the method. There was a key study, Stanford, Bruce McCandless, 2015.
Yeah. What did they find?
They taught people a made-up language using both methods and watched their brain activity, the phonics learner. Their brains lit up mainly in the left hemisphere.
The logic and language side.
Exactly. Analytical thinking, sequencing, processing language linearly. They learned the code and could apply it even to new words.
And the whole language group.
They took longer to recognize words, and the activity was much more dominant on the right side of the brain.
The creative side. Art, feeling, imagination.
More visual memory, spatial recognition. But because they were essentially memorizing symbols, they struggled massively when shown new words they hadn't explicitly memorized they couldn't decode.
Okay, the implication there seems huge. If one method trains the analytical brain and the other trains the visual emotional brain,
it has profound effects on how you think.
Right.
Phonics builds that logical, precise processing. Whole language, by emphasizing feeling and visual association, can lead to thought processes that are more subjective, changeable.
Less precise, maybe more easily swayed by emotion than logic.
That's the argument. A lack of analytical grounding makes you more susceptible to manipulation, and it directly impacts your ability to use language with precision. If your brain isn't trained to analyze the structure, you end up with, well, maybe the kind of vague word salad arguments we sometimes see.
Where definitions shift based on feeling.
And this lack of precision in thinking, the sources argue, translates directly into the lack of precision in writing.
And this shift away from phonics. The sources claim it wasn't just like pedagogical fad.
No, the argument is that it was quite intentional, part of a deliberate move towards something else entirely, something called critical literacy.
Okay, critical literacy. That sounds like teaching kids to think critically.
You'd think so.
Yeah.
The name is incredibly deceptive, but when you look at the actual pedagogical definition used in the field, as outlined in our source, it's something very different.
How is it defined then?
Okay, the definition given is learning to read and write as part of the process of becoming conscious of one's experience as historically constructed within specific power relations.
Whoa. Okay, that's a lot different from just thinking critically. It sounds very specific, ideologically.
It is. Notice the focus immediately shifts away from the individual reader's direct understanding of the text and onto these external frameworks of history, power, social structure.
Where did this idea come from?
The roots are often traced to Paulo Freire, a Brazilian educator, and it was really formalized in the U.S. by people like Ira Shore in the 80s. The core idea, stated pretty openly, was that education's primary goal shouldn't be academic, but deliberate, calculated social formation.
Social formation, so shaping beliefs.
Essentially, yeah. And reading, in this view, becomes less about understanding the text itself and more like, well, one source described it as just the syringe to deliver the right kind of social awareness.
Wow. So the skill of reading is secondary to the message.
That seems to be the implication. And the way it's taught reflects that. They use a methodology involving generative words.
Generative words.
Yeah, the teacher studies the students' lives, their environment, and picks words connected to their experience like brick or rice or slum or wealth. These words are supposed to suggest social themes around which consciousness can then be raised.
So you use these words to spark discussions about social...
Exactly. But often it seems before the students have even mastered basic decoding. There's an example from a 1996 teaching manual that's really telling.
What was it?
A facilitator wanted to discuss alcoholism and gambling in a village. Instead of using a text, they brought in an empty beer bottle and a deck of cards, physical object, a code.
And then?
They asked the learners how these objects made them feel. The whole discussion was driven by emotions and associations, completely bypassing the need to, read and analyze information from a text.
Okay, so this is the key point then. Critical literacy often teaches the analysis, or rather, a specific way to...
For the kids can even reliably read the words on the page.
Yes.
The analysis is guided heavily by feelings, by preset social interpretation, and it explicitly, according to the sources, trains students to disregard or downplay the author's actual intended meaning.
Because the correct social interpretation is more important?
That seems to be the underlying principle.
Yeah.
And you can see the potential effects of training a large part of the population.
Well, if you're taught from the start that your own interpretation isn't the point, that you need to look for the correct social angle based on feeling, you lose trust in your own ability to just figure things out.
So you constantly look outward for consensus.
Exactly. You quote the Rotten Tomatoes score, you see what influencers are saying, what Twitter user 719 thinks, because you've been implicitly trained not to rely on your own independent analysis of the raw information.
And this links to the emotion thing too.
Definitely. If feelings are the primary tool you're given for analysis, then emotional impact becomes the main metric. Hurting someone's feelings, as the source puts it, becomes infinitely worse than saying something that is factually inaccurate.
Because objective facts and precise language were never the focus of the training?
Precisely. The focus was the socially conditioned emotional response.
Yeah.
#6. The deliberate design of the American education system.
Okay, this is where it starts to feel really heavy. Because we're moving from talking about flawed teaching methods to, Well, the sources claim this was kind of the point.
Right. Here's where it gets really interesting, or maybe disturbing. The argument is that this wasn't an accident. This decline in deep literacy wasn't unforeseen. It was engineered.
Engineered by whom and why?
The sources point back to the early 20th century, arguing that the big shifts in American public education, especially the move away from rigorous academics like phonics, were funded and heavily influenced by major industrialists.
Industrialists, like factory owners.
Well, the key figures named are people like Frederick Taylor Gates.
Who was he?
He was John D. Rockefeller's main advisor, running his philanthropic venture, including the General Education Board, which poured millions into reshaping schools. And Gates was apparently very clear about the kind of education he thought the masses needed.
What did he?
There's a quote attributed to him from around 1913 that's pretty explicit. He basically said the goal wasn't to create philosophers or deep thinkers out of ordinary people.
So what was the goal?
His words were something like, "We shall not try to make these people or any of their children into philosophers or men of learning. So we will organize our children and teach them to do in a perfect way the things their fathers and mothers are doing in an imperfect way, in the homes, in the shops, and on the farm."
Wow. That sounds like training for jobs, not for critical thought.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a vision for a compliant workforce, people skilled enough for their roles, but not equipped or encouraged to question the system. It's about social condition, not intellectual liberation.
And this connected to pedagogics.
Absolutely. Figures like John Dewey, who's hugely influential in education theory, his focus, too, was less on pure academics and more on education for social formation, making sure kids learned what to think, the sources put it, rather than developing the independent tools of how to think.
So the conclusion the sources draw from this history is pretty radical.
It is. It's that the American education system, in its modern form, was specifically engineered to produce adults who were just literate enough to work at factories. Basically, PIAC level 1 or 2.
The 60% we talked about earlier.
Exactly. So from this perspective, the system isn't failing or in decline.
It's succeeding at doing what it was designed to do.
That's the provocative argument. It was designed to create conformity, discourage deep analysis, and make people reliant on external guide, which makes them easier to manage. And personal, imaginative, precise writing, that's a threat to conformity.
Okay, let's connect this back to the Dickens study again. 58% of problems.
Who skimmed, guessed, relied on feelings, didn't care about accuracy. They were behaving exactly as they'd been trained by critical literacy. They were applying the correct analysis, broad, feeling-based, instead of precise textual understanding.
But what about the other group, the 38% who were rated as competent? They had good vocabulary, good grammar.
Right. And this group is almost more revealing, because even though they could technically decode the word, they still failed to grasp the meaning accurately.
Why? What was their issue?
The key finding was they were totally comfortable with their confusion. If they hit a word they didn't know or a tricky sentence, they'd just make a quick guess based on the general vibe and move right on.
No stopping to check, no puzzling it out.
Nope. Just keep the flow going. Trust the feeling, which again fits that to him. Critical literacy training prioritized the overall narrative or social theme over linguistic precision.
The example given for this was just wild.
The Lord Chancellor and the Megalosaurus.
Yes. So Dickens writes about the Lord Chancellor in court. It's foggy November weather, and then uses this metaphor about a megalosaurus walking down London street to describe the primordial muddy conditions.
A clear metaphor, right? Impossible, literally.
You'd think, but one of these competent readers apparently interpreted it as two characters. Lord Chancellor and Michael Moss, misreading Implacable November, meeting an actual dinosaur.
And they were fine with that interpretation. They moved on. They had the word, but zero ability to engage with the meaning, the nuance, the figurative language. They performed perfect critical literacy, broad, feeling-based story-making, but failed completely at authentic literacy, at actual comprehension.
Okay, so we have a lack of basic comprehension skills, and even among those who can technically read, there's a failure to engage deeply with meaning due to this critical literacy training. What else gets lost?
There's one more crucial element, the sources argue, that contributes to why modern writing often feels so flat. It's the loss of prosody.
Prosody, what exactly is that?
It's basically the music of language.
Right.
Rhythm, stress, inflection, flow. It's how sentences feel, how they move. It's absolutely essential for conveying subtle meanings, tone, emotion, and for creating prose that feels beautiful or memorable.
The musicality. Okay, and how does that connect back to reading method?
There's apparently a direct link. Studies cited in the sources show that adults taught with phonics tend to have much better prosody, both in their reading aloud
and likely in their internal sense of language rhythm than those taught with whole language.
Why would that be?
Because phonics trains your ear to the sounds of language, to the pattern, the stresses within words and sentences. Whole language, being visual, bypasses a lot of that auditory rhythmic training. You don't develop that intuitive feel for the cadence of good sentence.
So this lack of rhythmic training could explain why a lot of modern writing feels clunky.
That's the argument. The sources compare passages to illustrate this. They mention Josephine Johnson's 1935 Pulitzer winner, now in November. Her prose is described as flowing like running water or pouring syrup. Natural, musical, effortless rhythm.
Okay, and the comparison.
Paul Lynch's Prophet Song, which won the Booker Prize in 2023. The analysis describes that prose as being full of interrupted, aborted segments of flow arrested by cumbersome hitches in the rhythm.
Can you give an example of that shoppy quality?
Yeah, the source quotes a line like, "The winter light, a cold November smear. She is moving through traffic, sensing her own exhausted emotions, her emotions automatic."
Yeah, you can hear it. It's just short bursts. No real flow connecting them. It feels abrupt.
Exactly. No natural cadence. It feels almost mechanical. And the contrast was apparently so stark
that a 1945 Sears catalog ad had better prosody.
That's what one analysis claimed. A simple catalog description apparently had a more natural rhythm and flow than the Booker Prize, which is quite something.
So if writers today haven't developed this internal sense of prosody, and they lack the deep comprehension skills, and they've been trained towards critical literacy,
they're kind of trapped, aren't they? They lack the foundational tools, precision, rhythm, analytical depth to create truly unique, powerful prose. So what do?
They fall back on
external structures, the gender themes we talked about. They write about the expected topics in the expected ways, maybe consult external authorities or consensus on what they should be feeling or thinking.
Which leads back to that homogeneity we started. Everyone sounds the same because they lack the deep linguistic tools to sound like themselves.
That's the devastating cycle, the source.
So, let's try to wrap this up. What does this all mean? We've gone from industrialists wanting compliant workers
to education reforms that ditched phonics for whole language and critical literacy,
which trained feeling over analysis, leading to a massive decline in basic.
Which means even highly educated people struggle with complex text and lack prose,
resulting in writing that often feels imprecise, homogeneous, and lacking in beauty. It's quite a chain reaction.
It really is. And if the sources are right that the system was, in part, designed for social conditioning rather than intellectual empowerment,
then waiting for the system to fix itself seems unlikely.
Extremely unlikely. The argument is the system is actually working as intended, even if the consequences look like failure to us. So systemic change probably not happening.
Which puts the responsibility squarely back on us, on the individual.
It has to. If you care about thinking clearly, about writing well, about genuine understanding, you have to take charge of it yourself, outside the potentially flawed system. So for someone listening, maybe an aspiring writer, or just someone who values language, what's the immediate takeaway? What's the first step, according to this analysis? It's maybe counterintuitive, but absolutely crucial. Get rid of the crutches, especially the AI ones.
You mean like delete Grammarly? Turn off the AI writing assistants.
Yes, all of them. The sources are adamant. Nothing is worse for your literary intelligence, critical thinking, and creative imagination than letting a machine do the core work of phrasing your thoughts.
You have to force your own brain to do the work, to find the words, struggle with the sentences, develop the rhythm.
Exactly. It's the only way to build that muscle. It will be harder, slower, more frustrating.
Yeah.
But it's necessary if you want to develop real skill and an authentic voice.
So the final thought here is pretty provocative. We have to realize that real literacy, the kind PIA ascribes, the kind needed for great writing, it now requires a conscious, independent effort. It's not guaranteed by these.
And if we accept the historical premise that the system was engineered by figures like Gates and Dewey for social conformity, to create workers just literate enough,
then maybe the 60% reading at a fourth grade level isn't a sign of the system's decline,
but a sign of its enduring, perhaps chilling, success.
And it's up to each of us to decide if we want to be the product of that system or if we're willing to do the hard work to break out of it and truly learn to read, think, and write for ourselves.
That's the challenge, isn't it?